He married a poor woman for revenge, but what happened next changed his life forever. Betrayal, danger, and a shocking secret will test him in ways he never imagined. Stay tuned to see how love and courage turned his empire upside down. Before we dive into this incredible story, do not forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you never miss our powerful, life-changing content. He married a poor woman for revenge, but fell in love instead. I married her to prove a point. Not to love her, not to save her, but to wound the people who once called me nothing. I was raised in a one-room house, with cracked walls, and the smell of damp earth after every rain. My father worked until his hands bled. My mother stitched clothes under a flickering bulb. Still, we were mocked. When I built my first company, investors laughed at my worn shoes. One of them rejected me publicly, then offered his daughter's hand to a richer man. The humiliation burned like acid. So when I became powerful, I chose a bride from the slums, a quiet woman with tired eyes, and dignity stitched into her silence. I thought the world would gasp. I thought my enemies would feel small. On our wedding night, I expected fear in her eyes. Instead, she served tea with steady hands. The steam carried cardamom and warmth. She said, "You married me for anger. I will stay for purpose." Her words unsettled me. She woke before dawn, cooked, studied business books in secret, waited for me with soft patience, even when I returned cold and distant. When my second venture collapsed, I broke a glass against the marble floor. Shards scattered like my pride. She knelt and gathered them, without a single complaint. Then she placed her savings in my hand, every coin she had earned sewing clothes. "I believe in the man you hide," as she said. No accusation, no resentment, only faith. That night, I cried quietly. For the first time since childhood, her belief became my discipline. Her calm became my strategy. We worked side by side. Small office, cheap desks, long nights scented with ink and instant coffee. Years later, my name appeared on billionaire lists. The same men who mocked me asked for meetings. But the real victory was not the wealth. It was the morning I saw her, standing in our glass tower office, sunlight wrapping around her like gold, reviewing contracts she once feared to read. I realized I had not married a poor woman. I had married courage. And just when I decided to confess the truth of my revenge to her, and thank her for saving my soul, I found something in her drawer that made my hands tremble. Inside her drawer, beneath neatly folded contracts, lay an old envelope, yellowed, soft at the edges. My name was written on it, in the same careful handwriting she used to label our files. My chest tightened. I opened it slowly. Inside was a rejection letter. The first investor who humiliated me had once offered her a job as a cleaner. In his office, at the bottom, in red ink, were words that sliced through me. Uneducated, not presentable. There was also a photograph, a younger version of her, standing outside that same glass building, where I now owned the top floor. Rain had soaked her clothes, yet her chin was lifted. My hands trembled. I walked into her office. She was reviewing a merger proposal. her eyes sharp, confident. "You worked there?" I asked. She looked at the envelope in my hand and nodded. "They rejected me," as she said gently. "But rejection feeds hunger." Her voice carried no bitterness. I felt shame crawl up my spine. "I married you for revenge," I confessed. The words tasted like iron. Silence filled the room. She stood up slowly, came closer. "I know," she replied. The world went still. "You knew?" "I saw it in your eyes on our wedding day. Pain recognizes pain." She placed her hand over my heart. But I also saw goodness buried under pride. I chose to love that man. Tears blurred my vision. "You could have left," I whispered. "Yes," she said. "But then you would have won wealth and lost yourself." Her strength humbled me more than poverty ever had. Weeks later, the same investor requested a partnership. He sat across from us, sweat gathering at his temples. He did not recognize her at first. When she began negotiating, her voice calm, precise, unstoppable. His face slowly changed. Recognition, shock, regret. And as she leaned forward to finalize the terms that would shift the balance of power forever, her pen hovered above the contract. The room was silent except for the faint hum of the air conditioner and the distant echo of traffic far below our tower. The man who once rejected her now wiped his forehead with a trembling hand. She looked at him steadily. "Before we sign," as she said softly, "I would like to thank you." He blinked in confusion. "You taught me that doors do not open for everyone. So I learned how to build my own." Her voice carried no anger, only truth. The words settled over the table like judgment. I watched the man shrink in his leather chair. For years I believed power meant making others feel small. But in that moment, I understood something deeper. Power was standing tall without hatred. She signed the contract, not for revenge, not for pride, but for growth. When the man left, his shoulders curved under the weight of memory. I turned to her. "You could have destroyed him," I said. She closed the folder gently. "Destruction is easy," she replied. "Transformation is rare." That night we drove back through the old neighborhood. The streets were narrow. The scent of fried bread drifted from roadside stalls. Children ran barefoot, laughing in the dust. I parked near the house where I was raised. The cracked walls were still there. She stepped out of the car and touched the rough surface of the bricks. "We will rebuild this area," she said. "Schools, clinics, jobs." Her dream was larger than mine had ever been. I once wanted to prove the world wrong. She wanted to make it better. Weeks later, construction began. Factories rose. Scholarships were announced. Families found work. News channels called me a visionary billionaire. But every success carried her fingerprint. One evening, as we stood on the rooftop overlooking the city lights, I held her hand and felt something unfamiliar. "Peace." "I married you for revenge," I said quietly. "But I live because of your love." She smiled. Yet her eyes carried a depth I had not noticed before. "There is something I have not told you," she whispered. My heartbeat slowed. The wind moved gently through her hair. As she reached into her coat pocket, she pulled out a small medical report. The paper shook slightly in the wind. "For months I have been visiting the hospital," Ishi said. My breath caught in my throat. The city lights below us blurred. "Are you ill?" I asked, fear rising like cold water inside my chest. She placed the report in my hands. "It is not illness," as she whispered. "It is life." I looked down. The words swam before my eyes. Pregnant. The world tilted. All the towers I built, all the deals I closed, suddenly felt smaller than that single word. "You are going to be a father," as she said. Her voice trembled for the first time. I dropped to my knees. Memories flooded me. My father's cracked hands. My mother's tired smile. The hunger. The shame. I pressed my forehead against her hand. "I was ready to give you wealth," EI said. "But you give me a future." Tears slid down her cheeks. "We will raise this child differently," as she whispered. With strength, but without bitterness. In that moment I understood. That revenge had built my fortune. But love was building my legacy. Weeks passed. We visited the old neighborhood again. She spoke with mothers, listened to their worries, held their children. She moved slowly now, protecting the quiet miracle inside her. One evening, as we were leaving the clinic we funded, a young girl approached her. "Will I become strong like you?" the girl asked. My wife knelt gently. "You are already strong," Ishi replied. I watched them, and a strange unease brushed against my heart. Her smile seemed tired, her grip on my arm slightly weaker. That night she held my hand longer than usual. "If anything ever happens," as she began softly. I tightened my hold immediately. "Nothing will happen," EI said. But she looked at me with a depth that carried both hope and warning. And the next morning, when the phone rang before sunrise, its sharp sound tore through the silence of our bedroom, I answered with trembling hands. It was the hospital. Her blood pressure had dropped suddenly. The drive felt endless. Red lights blurred. My heartbeat pounded louder than the engine. When I reached the emergency floor, the smell of antiseptic cut through my breath. She lay on the bed, pale but conscious. Machines blinked softly beside her. I held her hand. It felt colder than usual. "I told you," she whispered with a faint smile. "Life does not grow without struggle." The doctor spoke of complications, of risk, of urgent decisions. For the first time in years, money meant nothing. All my power could not command fate. "I will sign anything," EI said. "Do whatever is needed." Hours stretched like heavy chains. I prayed silently. Not for wealth, not for victory, only for her breath to remain steady. At dawn, a sharp cry pierced the corridor. Our child. Alive. Strong. Relief crashed over me so hard. My knees nearly gave way. But the nurse did not smile fully. "There is still concern for your wife," as she said gently. I rushed inside. She looked exhausted, yet radiant. The baby rested beside her. Tiny fingers curled like fragile promises. "You see," Ishi murmured weakly, "pain can deliver miracles." I kissed her forehead. "I cannot lose you," EI said. She brushed my cheek softly. "You will not lose me," she replied. "But promise me something." "Anything." "Do not let success harden him. Teach him compassion before ambition." Her words carved themselves into my soul. Days passed in careful monitoring. She slowly regained strength. When she finally stood and held our child near the window, sunlight poured over them like a blessing earned through fire. I felt smaller than ever, yet stronger than ever. Reporters waited outside the hospital. They wanted headlines. "Billionaire welcomes heir." But they did not see the truth. The real empire was not built in boardrooms. It was built in hospital rooms, in whispered promises, in sacrifice. Weeks later, as we prepared to announce a foundation in her name, a message arrived from an unknown sender. Attached was evidence of a betrayal from someone inside my company. Financial manipulation. Trust broken. And as I looked at the documents, realizing the threat could destroy everything we built, I heard her footsteps behind me. She stood at the doorway, our son resting against her shoulder. The evening light framed her in gold, but my face must have carried the storm. "What happened?" she asked quietly. I handed her the tablet. As she read, her expression did not shatter. It sharpened. The evidence was clear. My most trusted executive had siphoned millions through hidden accounts. A man I had lifted from poverty. A man I had called brother. The betrayal felt personal, familiar, like the humiliation of my youth returning in a new disguise. Rage began to rise inside me. "I will destroy him," I said. My voice sounded like the man I used to be. She walked closer, placed our son gently in his crib, then she turned to me. "If you choose revenge again," as she said softly, "you will rebuild the same prison you escaped." Her words struck deeper than the betrayal. "He betrayed our trust," I argued. "Yes," she replied. "And now you must decide who you are." Silence filled the room. I looked at the city outside the window. The factories, the schools, the lives depending on our stability. This was larger than my anger. We called an emergency board meeting. The executive sat across from me. His confidence cracked but not gone. He denied everything at first, until the documents were projected on the screen. His hands began to shake. "I was afraid," he finally admitted. "Afraid I would lose everything." Fear. The same fear that once drove me. I felt the board waiting for my command. Termination. Prosecution. Public humiliation. My wife's gaze met mine from the far end of the table. Steady. Unwavering. I took a slow breath. "You will repay every cent," I said firmly. "You will resign publicly. And you will fund scholarships for families you nearly harmed." Shock rippled through the room. He looked at me, stunned. "You are not sending me to prison?" "I am giving you a chance to rebuild your character," I replied. "Do not waste it." When the meeting ended, my wife walked beside me in the quiet hallway. "You chose strength," as she whispered. But as we stepped into the elevator, my phone vibrated again. Another message, this time from an international partner. The scandal had leaked to the media. Stock prices were already falling. And as the elevator doors slowly closed, I realized the real battle had just begun. The elevator descended in silence. Each floor felt heavier than the last. My phone would not stop vibrating. News alerts. Investor panic. Board members demanding statements. By the time we reached the lobby, screens were already flashing my name. Billionaire under internal investigation, the words burned. I stepped outside, cameras exploded in white light. Voices collided in the air. Did you know about the fraud? Is the company collapsing? For a second, the old instinct returned. Deflect. Blame. Protect the image at any cost. Then I felt her hand slip into mine. Warm. Steady. I looked at her. She nodded once. No fear. I turned back to the microphones. Yes, I said clearly. There was betrayal inside my company. Gasps rippled through the crowd. And the responsibility is mine. Silence followed. I failed to see the cracks. But we will repair them openly. No lies. No hiding. My voice did not shake. Because for the first time, I was not protecting pride. I was protecting truth. That night our stock fell sharply. Investors threatened withdrawal. Employees whispered in corridors. I walked through every department personally. Looked them in the eyes. We will survive this, I told them. But only if we rebuild on integrity. Weeks became a storm of audits. Public scrutiny. Long sleepless nights. She stayed beside me through all of it. When doubt crept in, she reminded me of the slum streets, of hunger, of perseverance. You built from nothing once, as she said. You can rebuild from honesty now. Slowly, transparency restored trust. Reports cleared my name. The corrective actions impressed regulators. Investors returned. But something inside me had shifted. One evening, as we sat quietly watching our son sleep, I realized success was no longer about expansion. It was about example. I turned to her. We should step back, I said softly. She studied my face carefully. From the company? Yes. Let others lead. We focus on the foundation. On people. A slow smile touched her lips. Before she could respond, my phone rang again. An unknown international number. I answered. The voice on the other end spoke calmly. There is an opportunity that could triple your empire overnight. I felt the old temptation stir once more. And as I looked at my wife, waiting for my answer, the decision hovered between ambition and purpose. The voice continued, smooth and persuasive. A private acquisition. Discreet. High return. Minimal oversight. Minimal oversight. The phrase lingered in the air like smoke. I knew what it meant. Shortcuts. Silence. Profit without transparency. Once, I would have accepted without hesitation. I walked toward the window. The city stretched below, restless and bright. I remembered the damp walls of my childhood, the sting of humiliation, the hunger that shaped my ambition. Then I looked at my son, sleeping peacefully, unaware of markets and manipulation. My wife stood quietly behind me. You do not need to prove anything anymore, as she said gently. Her words settled my racing thoughts. The caller waited. This deal will place you among the top 3 in the world, he added. Top 3. For years, that would have sounded like destiny. Now it sounded like a test. I built my empire on resilience, I replied slowly. I will not rebuild it on shadows. There was a pause on the line. You are refusing? Yes. I ended the call. The silence that followed felt clean. Not empty. Not fearful. Clean. My wife exhaled softly. You chose wisely, she whispered. I turned to her. No, I said. We chose wisely. The next morning, I announced my gradual transition from executive control to ethical advisory leadership. The media reacted with surprise. Some called it foolish. Others called it visionary. But inside, I felt lighter than ever. We redirected capital into schools, healthcare centers, entrepreneur programs for women in the very neighborhoods that once rejected her. Months passed. Our foundation flourished. One afternoon, while reviewing expansion plans for rural development, an envelope arrived at our office. No sender name. Inside were documents tied to that same international corporation I refused. Evidence of global exploitation, hidden labor abuses, government corruption. And at the bottom, a handwritten note. You made the right choice, but they will not ignore you. I felt a chill move through me. This was no longer about profit. It was about exposure. About truth on a scale larger than my company ever was. My wife read the documents carefully. Her expression remained calm, but her eyes carried fire. If this is real, she said quietly, silence would make us complicit. I understood the weight of what she meant. To speak would mean conflict, powerful enemies, global consequences. To stay silent would mean safety. I looked at our son playing on the floor, stacking wooden blocks without fear. And as I reached for the phone to contact investigators, a black vehicle slowly stopped outside our gate. The engine remained running. Dark windows. No visible faces. My grip tightened around the phone. Fear brushed against my spine. Not for myself, but for her, and for our son. She stepped beside me. Do not react with panic, as she said calmly. The vehicle door opened. A man stepped out in a formal suit. Measured steps. Controlled posture. He approached the gate slowly. I represent interests you recently declined, he said through the intercom. His tone was polite, almost respectful. We would prefer cooperation, he continued. There it was. Not a threat spoken aloud, but a warning carefully wrapped in courtesy. My old self would have responded with dominance, security, aggression. But I had learned something greater than power. I opened the gate. He looked slightly surprised. We are not enemies, I said evenly. But I will not compromise integrity. He studied my face. You are making influential people uncomfortable. Truth often does, I replied. He glanced toward the house, where my wife now stood visible behind the glass door. Steady and unafraid, you have a family, he added quietly. The sentence carried weight. Yes, I answered. And that is exactly why I will not bow. Silence stretched between us. Then he handed me a sealed folder. If you proceed, he said, Be prepared for exposure of your own past. My pulse slowed. There were chapters of my journey I was not proud of. Aggressive tactics. Legal grey zones for my early climb. Nothing criminal, but imperfect. He returned to the car. The vehicle drove away. I stood still, a folder heavy in my hands. Inside were copies of old contracts, media drafts ready for publication, narratives designed to twist ambition into corruption. They were prepared to rewrite my story. My wife stepped closer. They will try to scare you with your history, Ishi said softly. They may succeed, I admitted. She touched my chest gently. Then we tell the full truth first. Expose myself before they could distort it. Confess flaws. Own mistakes. Control nothing but honesty. The strategy was risky. Reputation could fracture. Investors could retreat again. But hiding would mean surrender. I looked into her eyes. Years ago, I married her for revenge. Now I stood beside her for courage. I picked up my phone. Scheduled a global press conference. Prepared documents of my past decisions. Opened access to independent auditors. As the announcement went live, messages flooded in. Support. Criticism. Shock. And just as I stepped onto the stage the next morning, lights blinding my vision, microphones waiting, my assistant rushed forward and whispered something urgent into my ear. Your former executive is missing, she whispered. The words struck harder than the lights. Missing? I repeated under my breath. He disappeared last night. No contact. No location trace. A cold realization moved through me. The man who betrayed us. The man who agreed to repay and reform. If he vanished now, the narrative could shift instantly. Scandal would turn into suspicion. Suspicion into accusation. The audience waited. Cameras stared without mercy. I stepped to the podium anyway. If I hesitated now, fear would own me. My past is not spotless, I began clearly. I have made decisions driven by pride and anger. Murmurs filled the hall. But I stand here because truth must not be selective. I disclosed early aggressive strategies. Legal settlements. Moments of ambition without compassion. I did not defend them. I explained them. Then I paused. And today, I continued. A former executive connected to recent misconduct has gone missing. Gasps rippled through the crowd. I do not know the circumstances, but I will cooperate fully with authorities. Transparency felt terrifying, yet strangely freeing. When the conference ended, markets reacted with volatility. Some investors withdrew. Others expressed cautious respect. I returned home exhausted. She was waiting in the garden, holding our son beneath the shade of a young tree we planted months ago. How did it go? She asked softly. I told them everything, I replied. She nodded, pride flickering in her tired eyes. Just then, my phone rang again. Unknown number. I answered slowly. A familiar voice spoke, strained and frightened. It is me, the missing executive said. I was taken. They wanted leverage. They want you to withdraw the investigation. My pulse steadied instead of racing. Where are you? I asked. There is not much time, he whispered. They said if you continue, your family will pay the price. The call ended abruptly. Silence swallowed the garden. The wind moved gently through the leaves. My wife watched my face carefully. They threatened us, I said quietly. She held our son closer. Fear flickered for a moment. Then resolve replaced it. If we retreat now, as she said firmly, they win forever. I looked at her. Years ago, I sought power to silence humiliation. Now I faced power to defend truth. I contacted authorities immediately. Shared every document. Every recording. Night fell heavily over the house. Security doubled. Lights remained on. Yet inside, there was no panic. Only clarity. As we sat together in the living room, waiting for updates, headlights suddenly swept across our front walls again. Another vehicle had stopped outside. But this time, it was not black. It was official. And as uniformed officers stepped out with urgency, one of them looked toward me and said, "Sir, we found him. But there is something you need to see immediately." I followed the officer to the vehicle. The street was quiet, except for the faint hum of the city in the distance. Inside the back seat, the missing executive Saturday. He looked pale, disheveled, but alive. What happened? I asked sharply. They held me for leverage, he whispered. Threatened to harm my family if I did not cooperate. I barely escaped. My stomach churned. The risk we had faced was no longer abstract. You should have called immediately, I said, anger and relief colliding. They threatened you too, and my wife murmured, stepping beside me. Her hand found mine. He nodded miserably. I feared it would endanger everyone, he admitted. I turned to my wife. It nearly did, I said quietly. But we survived because of your wisdom. Because we stayed honest. She smiled faintly. Yet there was tension in her eyes. The story does not end here, she said. People like them never give up easily. Days turned into nights of planning. Authorities investigated the threats. We reinforced our foundation. Our offices. Our homes. Yet, each move carried the weight of vulnerability. One evening, as we reviewed the latest security reports, a visitor arrived unexpectedly. A young journalist. She claimed she had evidence linking the same international partners to more than financial misconduct, files, videos, emails. She said her life was in danger if she revealed it publicly. I looked at my wife. Her hand pressed lightly on my shoulder. Do not dismiss her, as she whispered. Do not let fear decide for you. We decided to help her. Together, we verified every claim, contacted authorities in multiple countries, prepared safe channels for disclosure. Every night, I felt the weight of my choices. Every decision carried consequences not just for us, but for thousands dependent on our foundation. Our son slept soundly, unaware of danger surrounding us. One late night, as we worked in the office, the lights flickered. A subtle warning. An intrusion. I reached for the nearest flashlight. My wife moved beside me, our hands brushing. Then, a message appeared on my laptop. Anonymous. Encrypted. It read simply, You have meddled too far. Tonight, you will understand the cost of truth. My heart stopped. I looked at her. Her face was calm, resolute. We cannot hide, as she said softly. We can only face it together. Outside, the wind rose, rustling the trees. As a shadow passed across the window, I held my wife's hand tightly as the shadow moved closer. The intruder stepped into the light, a young man, exhausted, trembling, carrying evidence of the threats. They forced me, he whispered. I could not remain silent. Relief and weariness collided in my chest. Together, we worked quickly. Authorities arrived within minutes, guided by the information he provided. The international partners were exposed. Investigations were launched. Their network collapsed. In the days that followed, our company stabilized. Our foundation thrived. The neighborhood we once walked through as strangers now flourished with schools, clinics, and opportunity. I stood on the rooftop one evening, our son laughing in the garden below, my wife beside me, her eyes reflecting the golden sunset. I realized something profound. Power alone does not create legacy. Wealth alone does not heal wounds. Ambition without integrity can destroy even the strongest empire. The journey that began with revenge had led me to love, compassion, and purpose. I had sought to humiliate others to prove myself. And instead I had learned that real strength comes from kindness, honesty, and unwavering support. My wife had transformed my life, not with money, not with influence, but with courage, patience, and belief in what was right. We had faced betrayal, fear, and near ruin. We had witnessed pain, and yet we chose truth over shortcuts, courage over fear, and love over pride. That night, as the city lights shimmered below, I whispered to her, "Everything I built pales next to what we saved together, the soul of a family, the heart of a man." She smiled, and our son's laughter echoed through the garden. And I knew, finally, that life's greatest victories are never about revenge, but about growth, empathy, and standing for what is just. The empire we built would endure, not because of wealth, but because of the moral compass that guided every choice. And as I looked at my family, I understood clearly. The true measure of success is the love you give, the integrity you uphold, and the lives you lift along the way. No triumph is complete without heart. We had learned it the hardest way possible, and now we lived it fully. The sun dipped below the horizon, and the city felt peaceful, as if finally reflecting the peace we had fought so fiercely to earn. The end. Thank you for listening to this heartfelt story. If it touched you, share it, comment below, and remind someone you are never alone.